David. We're just giving you a review of the first 6 verses and the little bit that we did last week, and then we'll move on. Mishlei Shlomo ben David. These are the proverbs of Shlomo, the son of David, Melech Yisrael, the king of Israel. Ladas, in order to know, Chachma umusar, wisdom and discipline. Lahavin, to understand, Imre Bina, the words of understanding, to make them understandable. Lakachas musar haskel, to accept wise discipline. Tzedek umishpat umesharim, righteousness, justice, and fairness. Laseis, to give. Lapesoyim arma, to give to the fools cleverness. Lanar dasu mizima, to youth, to children, dasu mizima, knowledge and design. Yishma chacham v'yosef lekach, a wise person will hear it and increase his learning. V'navon tachbulos yikne, and a discerning one will acquire strategies. Lahavin Mashal umelitza, to understand parable and epigram. Divrei chachamim v'chidosam, the words of the wise and their enigmas. What Shlomo Melech is telling us is that this is he opens up with telling us what the book is and what the purpose and who he is. This is a book of Mishlei, which I will get to in a moment, and it is, who is he? Shlomo ben David Melech Yisrael. And there are 3 themes to the book of Mishlei. The first theme is Ladas Chachma, to know wisdom, which we spoke about last week, and we talked about the idea that you have to know, you have to be wise, you have to know what's going on in the world. If you want to become a better person, you got to know what better means. If you want to become a finer person, you got to know what fine means. If you want to be a person who's got strength, you got to know what's strong, what strength is. You have to have chachma. Then musar. Musar means the discipline, the ability to be able to make it happen. And then lohavin imre bina is that there has to be an understanding not only of the letter of the law, but an understanding of the spirit of the law. Where is this thing going and taking me? Because those are the 3 themes of the book of Mishlei, therefore Shlomo HaMelech identified himself in 3 ways so that we understand what his credentials are to be able to teach this to us. His first credential is that he's Shlomo HaMelech. He's the person of wisdom. He is a person who, when God asked him what he wanted, he asked not for fame, not for fortune, he asked for wisdom. He is the Ben David. Ben David, to let us know that when you talk about musar, you talk about discipline. When you talk about how to become an incredible person, so then you have to understand that you have to understand that it's not just something that you invent. It's not just something that you come up with. It's not something that you decide on what the thing should be. I'll talk about this more later, but that it's something that comes b'tradition. And that's why he identifies himself as a Ben David, the son of David, that he is getting this in a tradition from his father. And Melech Yisrael was Imre, it corresponds to Imre Bina, corresponds to understanding what the Torah is all about and what the Torah wants from you. Because as we spoke last week, a king had to walk around with the Sefer Torah wherever he went. And therefore Shlomo Melech has to identify himself in 3 ways to explain why he's teaching these 3 books, why he's teaching these 3 parts of Mishlei. Beautiful. But let's spend a few minutes on what is a Mashal. What exactly is a proverb or an example? And why is it that Shlomo Melech talked with Meshalim? Now, I did explain that there is no question that when you talk in a mashal, you can say more and it makes a greater impression. We talked about that story with the fish, which was a symbol of what happens in Gullus, what happens in exile. But really, and so if I want to tell you that, don't trust the nations of the world because they could toss you back into exile at any moment, I could tell you that. But when I tell you a story about it, when I tell you some fantastic parable about it, then it makes a greater impression. I can tell you to be a good person, but when I tell you a story about being a good person, when I tell you a story about something, it makes a much deeper impression. And if I could tell you a story about somebody that you have a personal connection to, so then it makes an even greater connection. There was once a mini series. Now this goes back to when I was a kid, so you're talking about a long time ago. There was a mini series that was called The Holocaust. Tova Feldshuh was, I remember, she was the actress, the main actress in the thing. It was a very, very big production, and it was over a couple of nights on television. It was a very, very major thing, and it was actually incredible. Now, at that point in my life, I was in high school. In my school, they weren't afraid of the Holocaust. Now, you have to remember, I grew up in a time very different than today, in the sense that you know the Holocaust survivors that we know are few and far between, and every year, unfortunately, there's less and less of them. I will tell you that I have clear memories of davening in shul with my father on a weekday, and the guy next to me rolling up his sleeve to put on his tefillin, and he had a number. And it wasn't strange. My grandparents weren't through the Holocaust. My grandparents, on both sides, they all came over before the war, but all the rest of the family did not. And we have some very major major events and major sections of the family that had incredible things happen to them during the Holocaust. There's actually a book on the market. The book is called The Unfinished Diary, which was written by a Wogelernter, by a cousin of ours who was killed just weeks before the end of the war. And he was on a farm, hiding on a farm with himself and his brothers and a few other members of the family. His son and his wife he had put them in with Christians because they looked like goyim, and he was able to hide them during the war. They made it through the war. He unfortunately was killed by this farmer weeks before the end of the war. As a matter of fact, one of the member he had sent out two of the members of the family to go in to find another farm because they saw the farmer was getting agitated as things were heating up. So they found another farm. They came back in the next morning, and the farmer, in the meantime, had wiped out the entire family. And so they grabbed his diary, which he was writing over 2 years, a year and a half, whatever. And he was writing a very beautiful. He was a Torah scholar and a very prolific writer, a very beautiful writer. And he was writing. He wrote the whole, basically, a diary, which is very rare for the Holocaust. Most of the Holocaust books that we have are accounts of the Holocaust, people telling over what happened in the Holocaust. But he wrote over a diary of the Holocaust. They took the diary, and in the meantime, his son and wife, his son and mother, excuse me, had made it to. They made it eventually after the war. They made it to Switzerland, but she got remarried, and the new husband refused to. He adopted the boy. The boy's name was Feivel. He adopted him, but he refused to allow him to change his name because he knew that the name was a very important name, and he wanted him to keep his father's name alive. When this Feivel got married, they sent his brother was in Toronto at that point. I'm leaving out lots of parts of the story, but I just want to make a point. His brother sent him the diary. It was extremely painful for Feivel because he was 4 when his father was killed. He didn't really know his father. He was separated from him from the age of 2. And it was very difficult for him. He put the diary away. Many, 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 many years later, he raised a Torah family, a frum, beautiful, wonderful family with just beautiful children. And his children turned to him and said that, maybe the reason why you were so successful is because our job is to go back to Poland and to go back to the farm and to find the bones, the remains of those that were killed, and to give them proper Jewish burial. And to cut a long story short, they went back to Poland. They found the farm. They were able to find where the bones were with great work. And they exhumed the bones, and they're buried today. The entire family is buried on Har HaMenuchos, one of the major cemeteries in Yerushalayim, here in Eretz Yisrael, which is just an incredible thing that most Holocaust survivors can't say that I can go to the grave of my father or my uncle, and I can go and pray by their grave on their yahrzeit because I know exactly the day that they were killed. So it's really an incredible thing. And then his son took this diary, and it was a 20-year project, and they translated it to English, and it was printed. It's called The Unfinished Diary. But Holocaust. So he's technically a Holocaust survivor. He's probably around 80 years old. This Feivel, though he has no recollections of the Holocaust. Most Holocaust survivors, it's very rare to see a Holocaust survivor. But I grew up that we weren't afraid of talking about the Holocaust, nor of, in the school, they always showed us movies of the Holocaust. There was, it was very graphic. And the movies in those days, by the way, weren't Hollywood productions. They were movies that were made with clips from the Germans themselves. So you saw mamish people you saw terrible things. But that's, they weren't afraid. It was just a different time. I remember when this program came out, this was the most incredible program. And the reason is, when you watch these movies, there was a famous movie that they showed called Night and Fog. That was a big Holocaust movie in when I was a child, and you didn't know anybody in the movie. There was you didn't see anybody. It was just there was no sound even. It was just it was just bodies and emaciated bodies and people dying, and you didn't know anybody. What they did in this Holocaust movie is that you got to know 6 or 7 characters, and when some of them died at the end of the movie, you felt incredibly connected to it because it was very, very personal, and it made a huge impression, much more than watching actual footage, which is an incredible thing to say, but that a Hollywood movie actually had a greater impact than a movie of footage of the Holocaust because you knew who the people were. Even on Tisha B'Av, when we sit and we cry over the destruction of the temple, it's fascinating that there are certain things that we say on Tisha B'Av where we talk about people, because just talking about numbers, just talking about people dying, doesn't have the same effect as when you can visualize it, when it becomes something that's very personal. When Hirsch Goldberg was killed, I think that every Jew's son was killed. So everybody had some kind of connection without knowing who his parents were or ever having to have met his parents. But there was just so much out there about him that everybody felt the connection. And the same as with the Bibas family. That was everybody's baby. There was a tremendous connection because it wasn't just a number, and it wasn't just a thing. It was actually something that we were able to visualize. We were able to see. You saw the pictures of the babies. You saw the pictures of the mother. You saw the movies, the videos of the mother and the interacting with the children. And it was just, you developed a connection. That's what a mashal is. A mashal is an ability to be able to develop a connection with the information that's being taught. And when you have that kind of connection with the information that's being taught, so then it sits inside in a very different kind of way. Rabbeinu Bachai, which was a 13th century scholar, had an incredible way of explaining it. He said, imagine, that somebody has a pearl and they lose the pearl in a dark room. And they can't find the pearl. They strike a match, and a little flash of light comes on, and you see where the pearl is. And when you see the pearl, the light goes out, but that flash of light allowed you to be able to go and to get and to retrieve that pearl. Says Rabbeinu Bachai that a mashal, a parable, an example, is really just a flash of light. The Torah is the darkness. And it's incredible that I say that. because you would think that I would say Torah is light. But Torah, until there's some light that's shed on it, it's dark. It doesn't mean anything. Look, even what we're studying, you could read this from today till tomorrow and not necessarily extract these incredible kinds of messages from them. There's a darkness to things. When we read Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, I'm going to talk about this in a few minutes of exactly what those words mean in a different context. But when you read those words, you translate them into English and you say, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." Pass the peanut butter. Like, what does it mean? It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't do anything for us. Why we read in the Lord God said, "Let there be light." Wow, isn't that great? It doesn't make an impression on us until there's a flash of light. And when there's a flash of light, then we see how beautiful, how incredible this is, and then we can go and retrieve the pearl. The flash of light is critical to revealing the light of Torah, the light of wisdom. And these flashes of light penetrate the darkness. Shlomo Melech understood that we were living in a dark time, and he understood that times were only going to get darker. And unless you have a flash of light, it's very difficult sometimes to actually understand what it is you're looking at, or even what it is behind that darkness. You know, when all of these events have been happening, and I use current events because it's what we're all living through. But when all of this was happening, I myself turned to my rabbis, and I wanted their flash of light, because I wanted to hear their take and their explanation of what was going on, so that I could understand, that it could give me a flash of light and the darkness that I was looking into. And it's dark out there. I could see a little bit, a flash in that darkness, and I can start to understand. And it gives you just a little bit of a perspective to be able to start to unfold and to unpack all the things that are happening in front of us.
Why can I ask you a question? Why did you have to ask the rabbi? Did you have some personal questions about what's?
My questions are not, why is God doing this? But how are we understanding? There isn't a question in the world to me that this is all God. There isn't a question in the world to me that I have no idea why he's doing this. But I just need that little flash of light. I need sometimes just that little, what we call a ha'ara, right? That little insight, just that little perspective of saying, did you look at it this way? Did you consider that? Did you notice this? There are so many little things that are happening that are actually not little, they're huge, that it's so easy to miss unless you recognize, unless you see there, somebody points out to you. And sometimes we're smart enough to be able to get it ourselves. I shouldn't say smart. Sometimes we're open, our eyes and our minds are open enough to be able to get it, but sometimes we're not. I mean, this guy, I'll just bring one example. This Keith, whatever his last name was, incredibly, he said that he was making brachas when he was in captivity. He was making hamotzi lechem min haaretz,
Which he wasn't doing it before. He actually started only in Gaza.
Not only did he only start in Gaza, he actually didn't know what it was before he got to Gaza. It wasn't like he decided not to make brachas. It wasn't in the realm of anything. How did he know that there was such a thing called a bracha? Somehow he saw a television program on television there in Gaza. And he saw somebody making a bracha. And that clued him into, and the bracha was hamotzi lechem min haaretz. And that clued him into, maybe I need to make a bracha. Guys, are you listening to that? Guy goes to Gaza. He's in Gaza, goes to Gaza. A guy is taken captive in Gaza. He's being held in darkness. And for 10 seconds, or however long that was, 30 seconds, he sees a program on television, and he gets the message from there that maybe this is something kedai for me to hold on to. And that's what gets him through. And when he comes out, they ask him, "What do you want?" And he says, "I want a kippah and
Kiddush.
a kiddush cup." You're talking about a guy who didn't know from a kippah or from a kiddush. I'm putting him down, Chasham. I'm just saying he wasn't brought up in any kind of traditional way. You have to understand how incredible it is. The girls that were holding on to Shabbos, the people that were holding on to their faith. It is unbelievable. You stop and consider for a minute that this guy, what was he doing watching a television program? Television is not a word that you would use for what was going on in Gaza, not to what we're hearing of what was saying, but that he needed that and that he responded that way. There's a famous story of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva was 40 years old, 40 years old, never studied a word of Torah. Now, when I say the word Rabbi Akiva, I don't care how much you've studied in your past, you know the name Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva was the greatest sage in our history. 40 years old. You know what he was doing for the first 40 years? Couldn't read Hebrew. Couldn't read Hebrew. 40 years old. You know what he was doing? He said, if I see a rabbi, I'm going to bite him. He hated rabbis. He had seen something that had set him off, and he hated rabbis. At 40 years old, he's walking in the desert with his sheep, and he sees water dripping on a rock. Can you imagine? Paint a picture, do a little movie in your mind. There's mountains, water's dripping out of the mountains, and it's dripping onto a rock, and he notices a hole, an indentation in the rock. An indentation in the rock. And as it's dripping, he realizes that this thing's been dripping for a long time and is making a hole. He looks at it and he goes, if water can drip on a rock and can make an indentation in a rock, then if Torah would drip into my brain, it can make an indentation into my brain. I'm going to go learn Torah. Just stop there for 1 second. How many people you think walked by that water dripping on the rock? I don't know. I don't know where it was located, but a couple of hundred, maybe, a couple of thousand. No, dude, they don't tell the story about anybody else that walked by. What do you think other people would have said when they saw the water dripping on the rock? Ooh, call a plumber. The rock's leaking. Yeah. What does Rabbi Akiva do? Rabbi Akiva looks at it and he says, oh my God, this is a message. It's a message about my head. It's a message about my heart. It's a message that I need to move myself. That's Rabbi Akiva. That's why he became Rabbi Akiva. Forget about the fact that the first 40 years he was an illiterate and the first 40 years he knew nothing. Okay, that's what it was. But who was he in his depth? Rabbi Akiva was a person who lived with flashes of light. And as soon as the flash of light went on, he was able to look at something from a completely different perspective. And he became the giant of the Jewish people. He became the greatest of the rabbis of the Jewish people. This guy, Keith, he's like a Rabbi Akiva. I don't know where he's going. I don't care. Doesn't matter. The fact is, he had that ability to be able, a flash of light was given to him, and he was able to open his eyes and to see through the darkness. The truth is, you know why the book of Mishlei is so critical for us? Because to learn how to understand flashes of light, how to take the words of Mishlei and to be able to use them and apply them to the darkness in our lives, to be able to use it to illuminate, to open up, and to give us a different perspective on things. Because it's when we see and we can discern things through these flashes of light. That's it's called an aha moment, right? When we have these aha moments, those are the moments that we can grow, and that's why Shlomo Melech wrote this whole book this way. Okay, I'm gonna tell you an interesting thing. I don't know if in your texts you have this, but in the scriptures, when it's written in scriptures, the first letter, Mishlei, is written big. Now, I don't know if you know this, but that there are certain letters in the Torah, not a lot of them, the Beis of Bereshis, the Shin of Shema, the Dalid of Echad, those letters are written big. The middle letter of the Torah, when you count all the letters of the Torah, the letter that sits in the very middle of the Torah is a Vav, and the Vav is elongated. When we read the 10 sons of Haman that were hung on Purim, the Vav of the name Vayazasa is written long. Every time a letter is written big, thick, long, it's a story behind it. There's a reason. So what's the reason that the book of Mishlei, no other book starts that way, starts with a letter that is elongated? So I'll tell you, Mem. What's the letter Mem? Mem happens to be the middle letter of the Torah. From Aleph to Taf, that's the beginning to the end. The middle letter is the letter Mem. I'll leave that for another time. Mem also is the numerical value of 40.
Sorry to interrupt you, Rabbi. Can you mute my mom because she doesn't know how to mute herself?
Sure.
Please.
That's why I've got this little God tool here.
Thank you.
That lets me mute people. I can't do much else, but at least I can do that. Okay, I've got everybody muted. If you want to talk, just unmute yourselves, please, and please, whenever you want to interrupt, please. Okay, so Mem.
I did want to ask you something. When
Sure.
you were talking about this, what's his name, that came out of Gaza and that he was saying
Keith.
that
I just can't remember. The last name is escaping me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about that all along because also like Omer Shem Tov's mother, exactly to the year when he was released, she became Shomer Shabbos. And exactly that day when it was a full year, he was released.
Right. Yeah.
And so what is going to come next? Because I
Yes.
also
Thank you.
think
Thank
what's
you.
next for them.
What? How do I know? Who knows? Who cares? Who cares?
Because then I think maybe what Hashem wants is for all of us to become Shomer Shabbos, to follow, to do to be chuvas. And then get what you needed and then you forget about it.
So I'll tell you that the only thing that I know, there's actually one thing that I know better than anything else in my life, that I don't know anything. That's the one thing that I know for sure, that I don't know anything. But I'll tell you, the one thing that I know from all of this is that I have no idea where any of this is going. I have no idea where any of this is going. And I don't know, is Hashem saying he wants us all to be Shomer Shabbos? I have no idea. But I do know one thing. What Hashem wants from us is to understand that this is a flash of light. For all of us, this is a flash of light. For every single Jew, this is a flash of light. And that we have to open our eyes and we have to look at this, and every one of us has to take it inside of ourselves. Now, I see that I've got 2 pages of notes. I'll just show you, just so you see this. It's not really so much. Can you see where's the camera? Can you see it? It's 2 pages of notes. Yeah, I've done 3 lines. Okay, there's a lot to unpack here. But I tell you, we will get to a very, very important place, still only in the introduction, but a very important place about taking it inside. I'm going to get there, and I probably won't get there till next week. But you have to see the flash of light, and then that flash of light has to go inside. It has to be something. You follow what I'm saying? That's all I know that God wants. He wants me to read this. He wants me to see the flash of light, grab the pearl, and take that pearl inside myself. Do something for myself. What Mr. Siegel does is his business. What you do, Karen, is your business. What I do, that's my business. That's what I got to worry about. How this changes me, that I got to worry about. And that I got to worry about. Because as you said, it's so easy for us to see flashes of light, so much more difficult for us to take those flashes of light and use them to light up our own internal darkness, to be able to do something with them. That's much more complicated. I remember during the Intifada, when buses were blowing up all the time, and you remember those years, and it was just horrific. But even then, we called it resilience. That we just sort of kept moving forward. But there was a certain amount of forgetfulness, which is dangerous and problematic. And I remember seeing in my Rebbe's siddur a news clipping about the blowing up of a bus. And I couldn't understand why that was the thing that was in his siddur. We don't use siddurim as as sort of file cabinets. We don't put stuff in there. Like, I didn't understand. And he explained it to me once, that the reason it was there was that he could always look at it, and he reminded himself, he used it as a reminder so that he wouldn't forget what's going on. He didn't need all the tragedies, all the evidence. He needed one thing, and he just happened to take that particular tragedy, that particular event, and it was just a constant reminder not to let himself slip into the place of where it just becomes regular. These things are just happening. And that's what we have to worry about with all of this horrific stuff that's happening, and all of our need to be able to move our lives forward and to be able to be resilient. We have to make sure that there isn't a degree of coldness, a degree of sort of, acceptance that happens. We have to see the flash of light, and we have to act on it. Like Rabbi Akiva sees the water dripping and says, that's it, I'm going to move my life forward. Okay. Mem 40. So why does the book start with 40? First of all, can anybody tell me what 40, what's significance about 40?
40 days in the that it took Moshe to be up.
40 days Moshe was up. That's right.
40 days of when you give birth, you have to wait 40 days for the mom to get better. There's like 70 things I can
40 weeks pregnancy.
Right. 40 days is considered when the soul comes to the body. 40 days is the beginning, really, of gestation. We said the first 40 days, the fetus is not really a fetus. It's considered a fetus at 40 days. The 40 days of the flood, 40 days of like you said, of 40 years in the desert, 40 days that the spies were in the land of Israel. 40 is the number of gestation. It's the number that has to do with birth. That when something needs to be born, then the number 40 is used. It's important to understand. Shlomo Melech wants us to understand that this book is about rebirth. It's about taking an incredible potential, taking ourselves, and about infusing ourselves with meaning and understanding, with giving ourselves a perspective on life and a perspective on living that allows us to be able to rebirth ourselves, that allows us to be able to strengthen ourselves. That's why he begins it with the letter Mem. You want to know what this book is all about? It's all about Mem. It's all about 40. It's all about starting over. Okay, just a beautiful thing. I want to give you another explanation of these opening lines. The Malbim, also a medieval commentator on the Bible, the Malbim explains these opening lines of Mishlei, Shlomo ben David, Melech Yisrael. He understands it a little bit differently, and he understands it like this. There are three ways that we acquire truth. And Shlomo Melech used all three ways to come to an understanding of truth. Let me stop here for 1 second. A lot of people will tell you that they know and have the truth. There are a lot of religions that say they have the truth. I spoke out last week that most of the truths that exist in the world are not, in fact, truths. Most of the truths that exist in the world are people's understanding of truth. I'll tell you an amazing thing. So a great rabbi once said that who is a person's what's called Rebbe Muvhak? Who is a person's real Rebbe, real teacher? Real Rebbe. So you would imagine the person that teaches you the most Torah, the person that helps you come to yourself, helps you lift yourself up. That's your Rebbe. So this rabbi said, your first grade Mora, that's your real Rebbe. Why? Because she's the only one that has taught you absolute truth. Because you know what she taught you? An aleph is an aleph, and a bet is a bet, and a gimel is a gimel, and a dalet is a dalet. And it's Abba, Ba, Abba, Ba, and that's absolute truth. Once you start talking about Breshit bara Elokim et hashamayim v'et haaretz, and I have to explain it to you now, I'm putting in myself and my understanding into that. It's not untrue, but it's washed through me. But absolute truth are is the words, is the letters, Aleph, Beis, Gimel, Dalet. In order to be able to be a real person, we have to live by truths. Not truths that come from our bellies, not truths that come from our own perspectives, not truths that come from things that we want to commit ourselves to, but truths that are absolute truths. You'll hear me speak about this a lot, in a lot of different ways, because this is something that I think is fundamental to Torah and fundamental to Judaism, fundamental to living life, that we have to live by principles that don't change, principles that are immutable, because something that is true is something that is perfect. What's the Hebrew word for truth? Emet. Aleph, Mem, Taf. A beginning, a middle, and an end. What's the word for lie? Sheker. Where are those three letters taken from? Kuf, Resh, Shin, and then Taf. They're taken from the end of the alphabet, but they're jumbled. Shin, Kuf, Resh. They're out of order. Because lies are always disconnected. They're always out of order. Things that are true make absolute sense in every situation. Aleph, Mem, Taf. What's the chosmo shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu? What is the seal of God? The seal of God is emes, is truth. When something fits, sometimes you have to work to recognize that it fits. But when something fits, when it has a beginning, a middle, and an end, when it's consistent all the way through, that is godliness, that is emes. Shlomo Melech was teaching us a system of life, of a way to live, of a way to see life. And he was teaching us a system of truth. And in order for us to be able to grasp that truth, Shlomo Melech wants to teach us that there are three ways to come to truth. The one way to come to truth is through prophecy. Let's just ask the question, what's prophecy? Anybody want to try?
It's to develop the word of God into the future.
How does the prophet get the word of God?
Because he has a connection with him, and
Okay.
he can understand what is going on.
So I want to ask you a question. When a prophet walks into a room, Does the prophet know what's going on in your head?
No.
He's a prophet.
There's
Connection is
sensitivity
with
and
God.
intuition.
The connection is with God, not with the humans.
Yes, I'll
Because
tell
he
you,
has
Becky, you're right.
spiritual
I'll tell
connection.
you, prophecy is knowledge of God given to a prophet by God. Which means when a prophet walks into a room, he has no idea. He can't walk in and say, Becky, stop that, right? He has no idea. Even though he can see God, he can see the upper realms. He could see the chariots. He could see the angels if God wants him to. He'll see only what God wants him to. A prophecy is a knowledge of God. It's a way to understand God. Now, you have to be fitting to be a prophet. You have to be ready to be a prophet. You have to be prepared to be a prophet. You have to sing to be a prophet. You have to be knowledgeable. You have to be holy. You have to be in all kinds of things. But it is knowledge of God given to you by God. And that knowledge, that's knowledge of truth. That's understanding the truth. Now, how many prophets have there been in Jewish history? Anybody know?
Six? More? I don't know.
How many did you say?
6
1,200,000
million.
prophets. Now, look at the book of prophets. How many prophets are there in the book of prophets? 48. How many prophetesses are there? Women prophets? 7. So you're talking about 54 prophets. Wait, so what, Rabbi, what are you saying? 1,200,000 prophets? 1,200,000 Kiflayim meyotzim Mitzrayim, double the amount of people that left Egypt. What are you talking about? What are you talking about? Why is there only 48 of them, 54 of them recorded? Because only prophecies that affected the future of the Jewish people were recorded and written down. But there were millions of prophets. Because again, prophecy is not clairvoyance. Prophecy is not just about messages. It's the knowledge of God that is given by God to a prophet. That's why Shlomo identifies himself as Mishlei Shlomo. Flashes of light, a new beginning from Shlomo, from the prophet, the one who is able to know God on that deep level. What's the second way to know truth? To get it from your parents, who got it from their parents, who got it from their parents, who got it from theirs. That concept of Masorah, that concept of tradition being passed down from generation to generation, that is an incredibly powerful concept in Judaism. As a matter of fact, it's the proof that the Torah is true. See, in every other religion in the world, the religion starts with some person saying, out of prophecy, God came to me and he told me, I'm God's son, I'm God's prophet, I'm the man. Judaism didn't start that way. You know when God revealed himself on the Mount Sinai? Anybody know how many people were standing around Mount Sinai? Anybody?
2 million.
How many?
2 million.
Somewhere between 3 and 5. Somewhere between 3 and 5 million. By the way, do you know how many people were left in Mitzrayim that didn't go out of Mitzrayim? 3 million. 3 million. 80% of the Jews didn't go out of Mitzrayim. 80% of the Jews didn't go out of Mitzrayim. 20%. And how many Jews went out? Well, we know the number of men between the age of 20 and 60 was 600,000. That's the number the Torah gives us of the amount of Jews that left Egypt, 600,000. So if I do the math between wives and children and people under the age of 20 and over the age of 60, it's got to be a minimum. We know that they were having 6 kids at a time. It's got to be a minimum of 3 to 5 million people standing in front of Mount Sinai. God didn't reveal himself to Moses. Then Moses said to the people, oh, by the way, Jews, God told me, I'm the boss. So what happened? God revealed himself to 6 million people, to 5 million people at exactly the same time. And that's why when we Jews were separated around the world and we didn't have contact with each other for 1,500 years, when we were in Ethiopia and Europe and we had no contact with each other, our stories are exactly the same. Okay, that one was in Amharic, this one was in Hebrew. They lost the Hebrew. Okay, wonderful, but it's the same story. It's the same Torah. It's the same Judaism. There were some significant differences, but only because they didn't have an oral Torah. But it was the same thing because we all came from exactly the same place. The fact that Judaism is still around, it's because it is not started from one person, but it's because it was transmitted, the truth was transmitted from generation to generation. And that's the second thing that Shlomo Melech tells us. You know how I got the truth? I'm Ben David. I'm the son of my father. And what's the third way of knowing truth? The third way of knowing truth is experimentation and experience. Putting your wisdom to test in the laboratory of life. And Shlomo Melech wanted us to know that his chachma, his wisdom, his truth was coming from living these truths, not just from theoretically knowing them. And that's why he identifies himself as Melech Israel, as the king of Israel. You know, I'll tell you a fascinating thing. Ethics of the Fathers, Pirkei Avos, begins with the following words. Moshe kibel Torah misinai. Moses received the Torah from Sinai. Umisoru Yoshua, he gave it to Joshua. Joshua gave it to the elders. The elders gave it to the prophets. The prophets gave it to the men of the Great Assembly. And the men of the Great Assembly said three things, and then we go on. The rabbis asked the question, wait a minute. Why does Ethics of the Fathers start with this thing called Masorah to tell us that the Torah started from God, went to Moses, Moses to Joshua, Joshua to the elders, elders to the prophets? Why do we need to know that that's how the Torah passed down? Why isn't this concept taught to us at the very beginning of the oral Torah? The very beginning of the oral Torah, the first Mishnah in the oral Torah, why isn't it taught to me there? Why is it taught to me over here by Ethics of the Fathers? Pirkei Avos. So I'll tell you an amazing thing. Because God wanted us to understand, because the rabbis wanted us to understand, that their teachings weren't coming from their own minds, from their own hearts, from their own feelings, but that this was a tradition that was coming from Mount Sinai. It wasn't cooked up and called a truth. It wasn't cooked up and paraded as a truth. It is a truth because it comes from Sinai. Once I know something's a truth, I can dedicate my life to it. I can use it as a flash of light. I can use it to illuminate my life. I can use it to live by because I know it's a truth. And that's the third thing that Shlomo wanted us to know. I'm Melech Yisrael. I'm the king of these Jews, and I learned about life and I learned about truth because I was connected to God, connected to his Torah, and I lived these truths and I've experienced them. Tell you, you know what an old person is called in Hebrew? You all know. Zaken. Zaken. Why is it called a Zaken? Ze kana chokhmah. This one has acquired wisdom. The Torah tells us, Mipnei seva takum, you have to stand in front of an old person. V'adarta pnei zoken, and you have to ascribe beauty to the face of an old person. Face of an old person sometimes a little wrinkled. It's, not as beautiful as it was when it was 20. Why does the Torah say v'adarta pnei zoken? Because the beauty of a zoken is in the fact that zeh kana chachma, they've acquired wisdom. Just by living. And when you've lived a truth, then you've acquired the deepest, purest wisdom. And that's what Shlomo Melech was coming to tell us, that this is a book of truths to live by. How did I get them? Shlomo the prophet, Ben David from my father, Melech Yisrael from living them and experiencing them. Beautiful. Okay, I think I'm going to stop here. I still have what to do. We're not done with these. I haven't even gotten to verse 3 yet. Right? This is, and 1 to 6 is a package. I haven't even unpacked verse 3, and that we'll start with next week in Yetz Hashem. We'll start unpacking verse 3, and then hopefully we'll get to verses 4 and 5 sometime before the wedding of our great grandchildren. Okay. No, it'll happen. It'll flow. It'll go in the next couple of lessons. But I think there's beautiful pearls, flash of light. I think that whole concept is a beautiful concept. I think the understanding of Shlomo Melech and wisdom, I think that's also a beautiful thing. Okay, any questions? I'll tell you an amazing thing. The one like advantage is that a lot of times when I give classes, I always have another class back to back. Well, this is Baruch Hashem late enough at night that there's no other class backed up to this one. So this is the end. This is the end of the road for tonight. So, so I have a couple of minutes. Anybody wants to ask any questions? Of course, I don't give.
Thank you, Rabbi.
I don't give you such
Thank you.
while we're talking.
Thank you.
But okay, it's my pleasure.
Thank you, Rabbi. Have a good night.
Have a good night. It's great to see everybody.
Laila Tov.
Laila Tov.
Can you stay for a little bit, Rabbi?
I can stay.
Thank you. Hello, Rabino.
1 second. I just want to take it off of. You know what?
Record.
I'm gonna
Go
end
out
it
and go in.
and then come back in.